The Lord be with you. A reading from the Holy Gospel according to Luke. Jesus said to his disciples, "And on earth nations will be in dismay, perplexed by the roaring of the sea and the waves. People will die of fright in anticipation of what is coming upon the world, for the powers of the heavens will be shaken. And then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. But when these signs begin to happen, stand erect and raise your heads, because your redemption is at hand. Beware that your hearts do not become drowsy from carousing and drunkenness and the anxieties of daily life, that day catch you by surprise like a trap. For that day will assault everyone who lives on the face of the earth. Be vigilant at all times and pray that you have the strength to escape the tribulations that are imminent and to stand before the Son of Man." The Gospel of the Lord. Well, just a little over a week ago, still recovering from my Thanksgiving eating stupor, I was amazed while watching the early reports of Black Friday and all the shopping hysteria. People in long lines, people camping out in the cold in front of the major retailers. And I remember thinking, Advent hasn't even arrived. Christmas is weeks away, and this is how we show our anticipation of the season. This frenzy is how we express our eagerness to fill the void in our lives. I heard my first Christmas carol not too long after that, and it struck me that just a slight change in the lyrics was what many of us needed to hear. Now, out of respect for all of you and for the church's position on the torture of innocent people, I will not sing it. But I did find myself substituting Jesus for Santa Claus. Listen carefully. You'd better watch out. You'd better not cry. You'd better not pout. And I'm telling you why. Jesus Christ is coming to town. He's making a list. He's checking it twice. He's going to find out who's naughty and nice. Jesus Christ is coming to town. He sees you when you're sleeping. He knows when you're awake. He knows when you've been bad or good. So be good for goodness sake. You get my point, I think. But that's how the first Sunday of Advent hits us every year. Just when we're beginning our revelry, well, maybe not. I think it started maybe the first week of October this year. But at any rate, just when the fun begins, we're hit square between the eyes with the stern and frightening warnings from this weekend's readings. Why is it that we hear these admonitions every year when Advent begins, and we're just starting to hear the warm sounds of the Christmas carols? Because the church is reminding us that it is time to remember the first coming of Jesus and to reflect on the second coming of Jesus, and not just to reflect on it, but to prepare for it. In the early years after the Pentecost, Christians thought that the second coming of Jesus Christ would only be a matter of years away. Many believed that St. Paul, early in his ministry, expected the second coming of Jesus would be so soon that he himself would not die before it occurred. And many believed that this is what Paul meant when he wrote to the Thessalonians, "We earnestly ask you and exhort you in the Lord Jesus that as you receive from us how you should conduct yourselves to please God, and as you are conducting yourselves, you do so even more." And so it's important to remember that we get ready for what is to come by living out what we believe. The readings today tell of a God that will step in and recreate his world. He'll put an end to the exploitation of the poor and the powerless. He'll punish those who have turned the things of the world into their gods. And he'll make his presence known to those who think they have hidden themselves from his wrath. People will die of fright in anticipation of what is coming upon the world. But have we not been as frightened many times throughout history? A few weeks ago, before Black Friday, for the first time, I heard about Black Sunday. I had watched a 2-part documentary about the Dust Bowl. In the 1930s in the Midwest, as greed brought about a man-made ecological disaster and it was coupled with a 10-year drought, many people thought that the end of the world had come then. Each summer in the early 30s, little or no rain came to the region. The heartless winds would deposit dirt into drifts several feet high against anything that stood in its path. The insides of houses were as full of dirt as the outsides. Opening the windows to let in the air to relieve the oppressive heat just invited more dirt than had already managed to creep in through any opening. People crammed each crack with scraps of cloth and paper, trying and failing to keep out the relentless dust. They tied dampened bandanas over their mouths and their noses, and they wore goggles if they had to go outside. They waved wet gunny sacks through the air indoors to try to settle the dirt, just so they could breathe. Outdoors, fences and tractors and walls were buried and hidden beneath drifts of dirt. People and livestock suffered and died. April 14th, 1935 was the worst day of all, Black Sunday. A couple of quotes from eyewitnesses. When the storm hit, my father grabbed us. I remember Daddy taking me and setting me down by the car, and he said, "Stay there, don't move." Well, I wasn't about to move. And then this neighbor man, he was crying, and his family was all crying, and Daddy went over and tried to help him, and he was sticking his hanky in the radiator to get it wet, and putting it on his face, and he said, "Oh God, we're all going to die." He said, "We're all going to die." And Daddy finally said, "Hush now, you help me take care of these kids." And that's when he told him, "You get your family in the car, and I'll bumper you home." Another one. My dad thought that we should stop and pick this neighbor up and her baby, and it hit just about the time we were getting out of the car to go into the house. And this woman was hysterical. She thought maybe she should just go ahead and kill the baby and herself because it was the end of the world and she didn't want to face it alone. So my dad quoted Bible scriptures to prove to her that it was not yet time for the end of the world, and that he had no idea what this was, but it certainly was not the end of the world. As we know, the world did not end in the 1930s, but we still don't know when it will. And the truth is, we cannot waste time worrying about the end times. We should not use up one more valuable second thinking about the Mayan calendar or the loss of the Hostess Twinkies. I have a friend who's a member of a fundamentalist evangelical Protestant denomination. He's fond of saying, "I love it when things get really bad in the world. This means that Jesus will be coming back soon." To Catholics, attitudes like this seem counterproductive and self-centered, and they show little concern for those around us. We have much work to do while we await the Lord's return. See, our life here is a preparation for His kingdom. And we prepare by having an active prayer life and by being nourished by Scripture and by growing in a real devotion to the Eucharist, by regular reconciliation, and by doing works of charity. Our lives can be devoted to loving and serving Christ in those who are poor, who are sick, who are weak, and who are vulnerable to being misled, like the young. We can commit to the corporal and spiritual works of mercy. That's the kind of life that characterizes believers. To feed the hungry, to give drink to the thirsty, to clothe the naked, to visit the imprisoned, to shelter the homeless, to visit the sick, and to bury the dead. We need to instruct the ignorant, to admonish the sinner, to counsel the doubtful, to comfort the sorrowful, to bear wrongs patiently, to forgive all injuries, and to pray for the living and the dead. See, I told you we have a lot of work to do. It's futile for us to seek a calendar for the end times and the Lord's coming. The great day of the Lord can overtake us individually on any day, at any time. The day we die is the day we appear before God. Life's events can overtake us, and many times we're not in control. And we can feel helpless and sometimes hopeless. But the Lord's message today is simple: to prepare ourselves for the unexpected through faith and action. When we trust in the Lord daily and then disaster strikes, then we'll have the capability to survive. As we make our preparations for Christmas, these readings remind us of Jesus' coming at the end of the world. And while this may seem contrary to the season, let us remember that whether Christ comes in glory or as a poor child, the results are the same. Let us then resolve to shun both the doomsday paranoia on one side and reckless complacency on the other. Let us always be awake in the Spirit by living a life of faith and love in service to the Lord so that whenever He comes, we can stand erect and raise our heads because our redemption is at hand. And then we'll be able to follow Him into the light and glory of eternity. The world of cold and darkness and hatred is the world that Advent calls us to change. And we begin with ourselves, surrendering any lingering hatred that we may have towards anyone. Maybe it's a person who really hurt us, a former boyfriend or girlfriend, a former husband or wife, children who now as adults estrange themselves from their families. Maybe it's that person at work or at school or in the neighborhood that just makes our lives difficult or uncomfortable. Maybe we have a hidden prejudice against a group of people because of their race, their religion, or their sexual orientation. As long as we allow that hate to remain within us, to dwell within us, we are alone in the cold and the dark. But we can fight that cold and darkness off with the warmth of God's love and the light of His wisdom. And we need to do this for others as well as for ourselves, not allowing our hurts and prejudices to destroy our opportunity to bring light to those in darkness. We invite God's love to flow through us. And one good opportunity to do that is to welcome those who have expressed a desire to become members of this faith community. Today at 11 o'clock Mass, we open our doors and our hearts to them in the rite of acceptance. This is the work of the Christian. This is the work of Advent. This is how we prepare for the Lord.